So in this video, we're going to discuss about frameworks that Python supports. One is Flask and another one is Django. These two are the framework that has been widely used in most of our times, currently trending, right? I see companies use Django frequently and I see certain companies use Flask frequently. Okay, so we're going to explain this in a detail. First, before we heads up into the detailing, let us first see what is Flask and Django, what is framework is all about. How does the Django and Flask differs to each other? Which one to prefer? At what situation? At what scenario we need to choose Django or Flask? These two things we're gonna discuss in detail right now. Okay. So as we know, Flask and Django are two libraries. Preferably, you can call that as a library. Okay. Of course, they are framework, but we're gonna use that as a library. What does it mean? If you want to use these two framework, you need to make sure that you download it in your command prompt in your system. How do you do it? Just open a command prompt, type pip install Flask. Since Flask is already available in my system, it says there is no need for me to do the installation again. It is that means the requirement is already satisfied. So to Django, there you see. For Django also the requirement is already satisfied. Requirement is already satisfied. Okay, so you no need to worry about these two things which is already installed. If it is not installed, then you have to install by yourself by using this specific command pip install Django and then pip install Flask. And if you use PyCharm, it's better that you create a new environment where you can set both these library Flask and Django. That I'll explain bit later. Okay, this is the first point. You're done with the installation. What is framework basically? Framework can also be called as template design. If I want to build a home, and if I build the home by the scratch by digging the deep hole, putting up the strong basement, so and so, that we call it as normal design. But if I buy an apartment which is already pre-built, then that is called as framework. Because I have a template, the only thing that I'm going to do with the template is that go and do the customization as per your wish. I repeat, go and customize as per your wish. That's what template design is all about. That means you will have some sort of code ready-made. The only thing is that configure in a such a way that you want to use it. So both Flask and Django comes into that principle of template designing. Okay, fine. Now let me take Flask first. Okay, what is Flask basically? Flask, we do call it as lightweight framework. Flask is called as lightweight framework. It gives you a lot of features. It gives you a lot of features without any involvement of external libraries. That is to execute a certain task. Okay, certain task, you no need to rely upon some external libraries because whatever that Flask gives you by default, that is for most sufficient. Whatever the Flask gives you by default, that is for most sufficient to execute the task that you want to execute using Flask. That's what I mean. There is involvement of libraries very less here. Okay, I can say it's a minimal. I cannot deny saying that completely eradicated, but it's very minimal. Okay, so that's why we call it it's a lightweighted one. Okay, it takes modular approach. That means creation of new feature. It's not an inbuilt one. Creation of new feature is not an inbuilt one. you need to take some help of some other library. Then if you argue with me, Mohan, then what is the use of first line? You told that it doesn't take any involvement of external library. See, to execute the basic task, there is no need for it to use external libraries. But if you want to use a new feature, your Flask will not give you by default. That means on addition of new feature, you have to rely upon some external libraries. Okay, and Flask is predominantly used on single page application. When the application that you're going to create using Flask is a one page application, then preferably you should go for Flask. Okay, and this is kind of a problem, I can say. What is it? Flask does not support bootstrap. You know what is bootstrapping, correct? When you can able to access the application in the same way in the mobile as well as in the laptop, that's what we call it as bootstrap. That Flask don't gives you. Okay, it doesn't help you in achieving the bootstrap. Okay, and it does not have any default support of the DB. It doesn't have any default DB support unless until it has been required by you. You can use it externally. Basically, it doesn't support inbuilt one. If you want, you can use externally. Okay. If you want, if I say that you want to use externally, then it's up to you to choose the DB that you want to use. So preferably or by chance or by default, it doesn't support any DB. That's what I mean. Okay. And Flask is generally we call as microservices. Flask in general we call it as microservices because we be using Flask for executing minute changes, a small changes. That's what Flask is all about. Okay. So these are the few features that I can say, what the Flask gives you. Okay. As we go forward, right, we'll be seeing different things. Okay. Next, same commands. I'll tell you how this Django helps you in achieving this. 1D indicates first point on Django. So Django is full stack web framework. That means it involves view, that is GUI, that is design, model, DB, and controller. It takes care of all these three aspects. It takes care of all these three aspects. That's what we call it as Django is a kind of full stack. Okay. Now it takes object-based approach. It takes object-based approach. Okay. Even the process that works inside a Django works on the principle of ORM. Basically Django ORM. Okay. Object relational mapping. Every concept works on the ORM principle. Okay. Inbuilt Django works on this ORM principle only. Okay. We do call it a Django ORM. You would have heard of SQL Alchemy. Okay. That is one of the ORM that Python supports, right? Similarly, for Django, it has its own ORM that we call it as Django ORM. Okay, so basically it's a object-based approach. Okay. So it's quite opposite. You can use n number of application pages and links. Okay, Since it's already having the design part as the inbuilt one, you can have n number of pages. So basically what might happen, it involves default libraries. It involves a lot of external default libraries. It is quite contradiction to that of the line number one that we discussed for Flask. So Flask doesn't take too much of involvement of external libraries, but here in Django we do associate ourselves with a lot of inbuilt libraries. That's what I mean. N number of application pages and links. Okay. And line number four, again a contradictionary term. Yes, Flask, I mean Django do supports bootstrapping. It supports. It supports bootstrapping. Okay, Django do support bootstrap. That means when you create an application using Django in your laptop, you can use that for your mobile as well. The design part won't be having a lot of changes. Okay, right. Fifth one again, easiest one. It supports or it has SQLite 3 as a default DB connectivity. Right. So to connect a DB, there is no need to worry about the external aspect of connecting the DB with a tool because by default Django supports SQLite 3 by itself. Okay, it supports that engine, and if situation demands you to use some other library, you can go for that as well. There is no harm in that. Okay, right. It supports lot of, we call it as microservices. Flask, we do call it as microservice, right? Here we cannot call this as a microservice because it involves a lot of features, a lot of functionality, lots of modules, right? So thing is that it's not as easy that of you do with the Flask because the complexity very high here. So we cannot call this as a microservice because to execute certain application, the involvement of you or the involvement of the code is very high. You have to do this code, that code, so on. So because just to execute an application, you have to set some settings all right. Then there should be URLs, then there should be a view file, and there should be routing file. If all these four connects together, and that is where you can able to execute your Flask. So it's, we call it as non-microservices because it is very large. Okay, and again, lot of pluses and pros and cons that we'll discuss as we travel across to Django and Flask. Predominantly, whatever we discussed is what the actual difference, the main difference between your Flask and Django. Okay. And with respect to the file and with respect to the accessibility, right? We'll explain it as I explain Flask and Django separately, how the routing happens, whether it supports HTML, can I have some sort of design to be rendered back? Yes, design you can render both in Flask as well as in Django. Okay. So this we'll see. So when I want to put this in a common terms, so it Django is a open source, again another plus, and very fast in order to in spite of the complexity, it is very fast in the development and it is very easy and very much secured. Okay, the Django part. Whereas Flask, it's a lightweight as I discussed in the very first point, and it has minimal feature that we need to confess, and it's again open source like that of a Django. Okay. So now you would have come into the conclusion when we should go for Django and when we should go for Flask. So Django, make sure that you use when you have larger program application to be developed. Whereas in other one, when you want to have certain modules, certain small application, then go for Flask. Preferably, or it's up to you to choose what is most needed, most deserved for the project that you work. Okay, so these are the differences, people, between Flask and Django. Okay, now I'm going to explain about the way these both Flask and Django works. Okay, hi guys, welcome to another video. So in this video, we're going to discuss about the execution of a Flask. Okay, in the previous videos, you people would have experienced in how to work with the Django, right? Now in this video, we're going to see how we can work with the Flask. Okay, for that, let us create a Python file as usual, and Let me keep it in here. Okay, it's a new folder. Let me put today's date 04/03/2022, and then I'm gonna put my Flask. Say Python underscore Flask underscore March underscore 04. Try to always create a file name in this structure so that file name will not get coincident with that of your library. You should always keep this in mind. Click save. That's it. We have done with the file creation. Now what is the important thing? We need to import the corresponding library, which is a Flask. So Flask is the corresponding library that we're gonna execute our microservices, or we're gonna create our microservices. Okay. Now, as we seen in the Django as well, right? To run any application or to run certain services, you need to select file for which you're gonna run. So I'm gonna select my own file. So let me create an object. App is an object that I'm creating where I'm gonna use method called Flask, Flask in a capital letter. Inside that, I'm going to put this syntax. You know this, right? In Python, a name that has underscore on the left hand side as well as on the right hand side. In fact, a double underscore on left and right hand side is what we call it as an attribute. And this corresponding name attribute tells you that this code will gonna consider the current file. Okay, current file is Flask underscore Python underscore Flask underscore March04. So your application will be running on this file. Okay, the routing and everything will happen on this specific file. Okay, that's it. Now, what is the important step? You need to make sure that you set this configuration. I already told you, right? The Django and Flask is all about the configuration that you are setting it up. Okay, because they have a default template. Only thing that you have to do is that configure that. The first thing that I'm configuring here, debug mechanism. Debug is equal to true. So what I'm basically, I'm setting my debug mechanism into true. That means what? Whenever I do the changes to my current code, that get reflected onto the running service. As of now, I'm not running this specific service. It is just in idle state. So in future, you might be running your services at the parallelly where you may have to do some changes. So just to accommodate these two processes in a parallelism, right? We need to put this debug as equal to true. The same corresponding code you would have seen in Django setting file. There at starting of it, right? You would have experienced one code called debug is equal to true. That is what to do the dynamic changes. Fine. Then I need to make sure that I run this application app.run. I should run this. But now what happens? You are told your class that it is going to consider that your current file as a current file, which is a Python file as a part of the application, and you're going to run that. But when it runs, right, at which function the routing should happen? You need to mention that. So I'm going to mention a function. Def home. Generally, you can keep any name, but ideally, when we take training, there, when we say example, right, the first method will be always home. This is user-defined method. You can set your own method. You can set your own method. Okay. Next, when we go for API, which we already discussed right now, application program interface. That means what? You're going to consume a API. Consumption of API can be done with two mechanisms, get and post method predominantly. I'm repeating, get and post method is something that we use predominantly. Okay. On top of that, there are a lot of methods. Get, put, post, delete, and lot more methods. But basically, the common two methods we associate ourselves is get and post method. Get method is to just consume the application without even sending any input. Post is to get the API. After getting API, you just give the data back to the API. After the data received in the API will give you the response. This is what we call it as post method. You're giving some input. Sometimes when you deal with a DB related operation inside of Flask, you may have to deal with this kind of a post method. So basically, Whenever you set a function, you need to decorate the function with proper routing. Now I'm going to decorate this by, look at this, app at the rate. You know that decorator means onto the function, you do something with the at the rate symbol. So app dot route. So you're telling that you're going to route this function. That means when this application is running, you're going to route this function. At which API? You need to mention here. Now I'm going to mention just a slash. That means what? A empty API. That means IP address colon the port alone. Okay. Next, you need to mention the method which you wanna or which you're gonna give the data into it. So now I'm going to set this as a get method because, for example, right, I'm going to keep this specific method as a get method. The user can only consume it. Okay, I did. Now what happened is that you're telling that somebody hit a website. What website? You know it, right? Generally application runs on this IP only, and Flask runs with the 5000. So basically when you run this program, this will happen. Slash slash 127.0.0.1 colon 5000. When you hit this website, it will come back to this run method. Run will go to any method that has a routing. So it will come here, and if my IP is like this, then it is an empty route. So it will come to this method and it will see, okay, this guy has given a get method. So now as a developer, I need to tell what kind of thing that this function should do. So return, because it should return the response, right? Return a normal response. Welcome to my programming. Okay, this is what it is. Now, whenever you run a Flask and Django kind of application, it is always advised that you run on your PyCharm. If not, at least run on your command prompt. How do you run in the command prompt? Let me show that to you. Okay. This is the current folder, and look at that. Select the path, cmd space python slash that. If you put tab, it will display all the files. Okay. Since I have only one file, it is directly projecting that. Okay. For somebody's system, right, this Python as a prefix is not needed. You can directly run your Python file. For some cases, you may have to enter the software language space followed by the application name. When you run, look at that. It started your application. It is creating the environment and it is working on the WG. We already seen it is the layer to connect your application and the server. Okay, and debug mode is an on. Okay, debugger is active state. That means whatever you write the code and the code comes up the error, the debugger will catch the error. Okay, now you couldn't see the specific IP where it is running, but usually that runs on 127. Okay, look at it. You wait for some time. It should work. If not, what you can do parallelly instead of wasting a time, let me open that PyCharm. Network issue. Okay. So let me run in PyCharm parallel so that you'll understand. Look at that. Let me open this terminal. This is the terminal. Give me some second, people. Let me open that again. Okay, wait for some time because yeah, now I'm gonna run this. Okay, now as is the same issue. I need to set the interpreter here. So settings, Python interpreter. Okay, it is taking on default one. Okay, treat it as a Flask client. Okay, give me some second. Look at that. It is discovering the basic files to be added along with this Flask application. Okay, once you're done one, you can see this button with the green color icon for running this. You can see at the bottom of it, right? Let me close this then. Let this create a file. Look at that. It's now updating the skeleton, the basic essential part. Let us wait for 2 minutes. Yes. Now when I run, look at that. It got hosted. So let me copy this and paste it in the browser. Look at that. Whatever I've given in the form of text is returning here. So this is what the basic way of running your Flask file. I repeat, this is the basic way to run your Flask file. Okay. Now, like with the Django, right now it is running with the 127. If you want this to be run on your some other IP, you can do that, and also you can change the port of it. That we'll see later. Okay. Now, whatever we see is a normal application. The application that runs with the content of text, return of some text content, right? Now, let me show you how to return a JSON output. Okay. So now I'm going to create something called cricket. Let this be a dictionary, which is going to contain, let this be a list, which contain a dictionary, list of dictionaries. Okay. So each and every dictionary will have some ID colon 1. Let me keep the ID as a string. Okay. 1 name colon Tony. I'm going to create another ID with 2, and the key it is going to have is name colon ID colon 3 our name colon Roy. So basically I have a dictionary. Now instead of returning this text response, I'm going to return this JSON response. So now the data that you have at line number 7 is not a JSON output. It is a plain list of output. Okay. So now I want to convert that to JSON. There are a lot of way to do it. In fact, Flask itself gives you a library. So from Flask, import, look at that, JSONify. That means the normal content will be reflected back, change back to JSON content. So let me create another file. Def home to colon return. I should return the cricket, but cricket will not return as it is. So what I have to do? I have to JSONify that. What I'm going to do with JSONify? My list called cricket. That's it. So now here I need to decorate this function with app.route, and this time let me route like players. Okay. So let this be the method like get only. That's it. Now, whenever URL comes up with this player as an API, right, then it will return then it will return this particular JSON output. Okay, since you're already having this in the running state, it would have got by default. Okay, it will automatically detect, but still I'm running it one more time. Okay, yes. So now when you hit, you will get the response, but when you hit like this, look at that. Now it is displaying the JSON output. Now it is displaying the JSON output. That's how the Flask works. So whatever we seen is two things. One, how to return normal content, and next one is that how to return a JSON content. Okay. Now I'm going to give some specific things. What it is returning? It is returning all the JSON that you have as a part of your input. Now I'm going to create another function which is going to give a specific ID as per the number that you enter on the URL. Now in the URL you are very generic. You are hitting the route call only players. Now I'm going to create another route, another decorator for another function which is going to give you the specific ID. Okay, look at that. Let me create another function. Okay, def home 3. Right, first decorate that with whatever you want. App dot route players dot id. You're going to set the player with their corresponding ID. That means you're going to enter this. Okay, or I'll keep it as a simple function. Players ID. That's my route. Here, same thing. Methods is equal to get method. So now I'm going to do some conditions. Check it out. Okay, if ID in request dot auths. So what I'm basically telling is that if somebody hits the URL with ID, okay, when somebody hits with ID in the keys of a URL, right, people. So what I did was I'm trying to see if the user enters in the URL with this key ID. That's what I'm checking. Whether this specific letter ID in the smaller case is available in the request. If it is available, then what I'm going to do is that ID is equal to, okay, int of, I'm converting something integer. What integer? Request dot. Yes. So let us focus back to the same thing that we have started here. So let me add a line number just to give you the clarity. So at line number 11, we have decorated the function with the normal root, empty root. And at line number 15, that particular function home2 is decorated with the route of players. And now home3 is now going to get decorated with the IP call players ID. Now what I'm going to do is that I'm not only going to get the method directly. Instead, I'm going to pass some query string. Query string means whatever the expectation that you have as a part of the get method, you're going to post it in the URL so that it will come back here and it will fetch the data. So I'm going to get ID. That means if a person hits a API like players ID slash ID, it will come here. Okay. After it reaches this specific path, I'm doing this. I'm converting the integer. What integer? Request dot argument. Whatever that I get argument, that will be the form of dictionary. So I'm just getting like ID. That means from the URL, I'm getting this dictionary key and I'm just converting into the integer. I'm data. So ID is a key kind of stuff. And whatever that is passed as part of ID is what we call it as the value. So value that I'm getting in the form of argument of ID, which is an argument of that particular ID key. So it will return a number and I'm keeping that number in the integer form. Okay, that's it. So now what I'm going to do is that else return error, else return error, no such field. For example, if somebody hits ID in the form of capital letter, it will throw error. Okay. Now I'm going to create an empty list. Say results is equal to some empty list. Then I'm going to travel the book with a for loop. So look at that. For data in cricket. Okay. So cricket is the list which contains a group of dictionary. So I'm going to loop that. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is that if data of the ID, I'm just checking up ID of this data, and if the ID of the data is equal to the ID that I retrieved on line number 21. So basically this is to check this ID and I'm comparing with that of this ID, line number 21 ID. If it is same, then it is a match this element, right? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to add that as a part of my list, result dot append of that particular data. Okay. After that, what I'm going to do, as usual, return JSONify that particular results. Okay. Simple. What I'm doing, I'm going to check whether the API is having a letter called ID. If it is ID, get the value of the ID, because URL will be produced in the form of dictionary. So I'm getting value of the ID. After getting the value, I'm checking that ID whether it is equal to the ID of my cricket dictionary that I have at line number 8. If it is match, I'm appending that particular data into my result, and finally I'm producing the result back. Okay. So you know that how to run, right? Let me run that again. Look at that. Go and type CMD, enter Python space this ID. So it will run a specific command. So what I can do, look at that. Copy this, go to the browser, enter this, and you had two dictionary. What was one? You had two routing. What is the first routing? Just a players. Okay. So if you put players, entire data is coming. Now I'm going to put another, kind of row that is called players ID. Look at this. Players ID, question mark, ID is equal to 1. Okay. Now what actually happening is that a request method is not defined. That is what it is throwing an error, because we need to have a method called request that needs to be part of our functionality. So what you can do, go there and take this request. Let me save. Let me refresh. Okay. So I think I have made some mistake. Give me a second. Give me a second. Okay. Here at line number 21, I made a request kind of stuff. Okay. Basically, it's not because of the input. It is because of term that I have produced here at line number 21. It's supposed to be a request, but unfortunately, I made that as a plural form. So it is throwing error. So now look at that. Since I have passed this ID is equal to 1, this is what we call it as query parameter. So inside URL, you need to pass certain key, and what the code that you written will do is that it will fetch the value of the key. It will check whether that particular value is available in any of my key that is I given in the part of it. If both matches, it produces that particular list. So this is one way of executing your Django. I mean Flask application. Okay. So whatever we seen is a different Git methods. You can see different Git method. Okay. Now, what you're doing right now, you're just testing that in a browser. Okay. Now, at times, what you can do is that you can test the same thing in two different way. Now you're using a browser to check whether it works fine or not. At times, you can use some other tool for checking that. What is the tool? A Postman tool. You can have the Postman tool as a part of your extension. Let me click apps. We don't have any extension, right? Look at that. Postman extension for Chrome. Click that and you click add to Chrome and add app. It will take some time, then it will set the particular Postman as a part of extension. Or if you feel that your system is good enough to occupy this library, what you can do? You can install Postman as part of your system. Look at that. I do have Postman as part of my system as an application. You can have that also. It will take some time for this to produce, and you can see at the background, Postman is also added as an extension of my Chrome. What you can do? Same URL. Since it is a get method, right? Copy paste, copy paste, and this is get method. Look at that. Now whatever I passed is nothing but a query parameter. Look at that. So I need to click the param, and if at all any input that I supposed to give as a part of a query parameter, you can pass it here. If you remember in here, what is this ID is equal to 1? So in a URL, when you put something after the question mark, that we call it as query string. Okay. So whatever you see right now is nothing but a URL with a query string. So just because you sending ID is equal to 1 doesn't make this API as a post method. Still is the get method, but you're trying to get a specific method. You're not putting input back to the table or input back to the code. You're trying to fetch a specific data. So that we call it as query parameter. So in any URL, when you see a question mark after that some data, then you itself can recognize or predict that yes, that is a query parameter. So when you run, look at that. The response that I expected is produced here. That's what Postman does. A Postman is a tool for checking out your stuffs. Okay. And Postman you can have as an application also. Look at that. Go to app, click Postman. So whatever that you done with the physical application, same thing you can do. Okay. You can just click that straight away to the application and click there, close there, and you can enter the ID. Okay. If you put here, you will get an option. Look at that header, body, press skip, test. Let me run this. There you see, you got an output. Okay. So now tool is better than that of extension, but at times when you don't have the accessibility to download any tool, it's better to have the extension. This is what it is. And we do have another tool called Insomnia to check the same. Okay. Now this is second layer. So one, we checked via browser. Number two, we checked via the tool called Postman, and there is another tool called Insomnia that also you can use. Third, you can test it via your Python. Okay. Let me show you how that. Let me open that with a PyCharm. Right. Let me create another Python file here. import request. I guess you don't have that one. So let me go to file, setting, Python interpreter 3.9 and see if you have a request. Yeah, it is already there. Okay, it's not there. Let me install that quickly. It is installed. Let me close this. Let me click OK. Right. Look at that. Data is equal to request dot get of that URL and print data dot content. Let me show this. It's indexing. You can see at the bottom of the screen, it is still blocking or it is still configuring certain features. Wait for some time. Right. Now it is done with the indexing. Let me run this. Look at that. The data that is supposed to be for the ID1 is getting displayed here. Since you are retrieving that with the normal stuff, right? It is giving the binary code. You know how to convert this. You can do the output into the encoding mechanism to get the data result. So basically, either it is a Flask or a Django. If you have a certain codes, if you have a certain elements, or certain API, you can test in three different ways. One is on the browser, second one is on the tool, third one is through any software language that you familiar with, either it is a Python or any language. Since we are dealing with Flash, right, it's always good that you try with a Python. So this is how you can test. So even in our time, right, so at time, if there is something that I have to test manually, I have to do with the postman, and sometimes I have to check whether the code is working fine along with my Python code. I have to run this and check. Okay, this is what we call it as finding out or checking out the API. Precisely testing of APIs. Okay, so now whatever we seen is the various get method aspect, different get method. So now we'll be focusing on various post method, how to use the post method concept. Okay, so now we're gonna check a post method. Whatever we seen is, guys, get method. Now we're gonna see the post methods. Right. Okay. So this is how you work with the get method. Okay. As I discussed, right, there are a lot of methods that you get associate yourself in Flask. First is get method. Get method we already seen. When you want to get a text or some sort of output from the API, you use get method. And post method we're gonna see right after this. Post method is something that we need to put some input to get the output. And that what post method. And there is a method called head. Head means almost it is similar to the get method, but there is no response body. We'll be getting it directly. And there is a method called put method, even though we don't use normally, but you need to understand. So what it will do is that it will replace all the representation that we had with the initial code. Okay, that means it will update the content. That's what it is. Delete means whatever the data will give, it will delete that particular data from the table or from any source. So these are the different methods that we associate, but here nothing to worry. Only two methods that you need to focus is one, the particular get method and post method. Okay. Now I'm going to explain you the post method in a different way. Okay. So let me go to the folder where we have this. So let me create one HTML file. Okay. Okay. So Let me create a normal HTML body, and then we're going to set a form. So when you want to display this, that is what we call it as form. Form action. What that form supposed to do? So form needs to go to this specific folder 127.0.0.1 colon 5000 slash admin. Okay. So method is equal to, you need to mention the method that you want to consume. So let that be post method. Okay. Now you're going to set three things. Okay. Look at that. Player name, then you need to do the input. Input is the type. Input means I'm going to get the data. So input space type. What type it is? It is of text type. Okay. Followed by what you need to put is equal to name. Okay. Let me just put like AA and then slash and then close the paragraph. Okay. So in the next para, that is in the next line, I'm going to create another input. Input means I'm going to do it. Type is equal to, it is of submit type. Basically, you're going to get one text box where you need to enter the data and you're going to enter the submit button. Submit value. Value is also submit one. Okay. Then close that and show to the P. Okay. Next, what you can do, you close the form. Next, what you can do, you close the body. Next, you can put the HTML. Okay. So now go to file, save as. Let me put something like, let me put like admin.html and select this all files and save. So basically, you created HTML file that you can see here, admin g. It's an HTML file. Now I'm going to have the post method along with the get method. I'm going to have both. Okay. So let me just truncate the one which is already running. Okay, it's done with running. So let me create another Python file. Python post as usual from Flask, import Flask, JSONify, request, and URL for. These are the libraries you need to install. As usual, you need to create an application using your Flask method. Okay. If you ask me more in last code, you put like Flask.Flask, but why here plus? Because at line number 1 itself, I directly derived this capital Flask. So I can use it directly. Okay. Now I'm going to create one application. Definition 1. Application name itself 1. Just for the namesake. Colon. Return. Welcome. Format of. You're going to welcome some data. Let that be a name data. Okay. So now you're going to decorate this specific function with your routing at the rate app.route, and as of now it should be empty route. Okay.